today, as Javante mentioned, we're going to be covering search engine optimization basics and sharing tips and tricks for boosting your web content for SEO. And I did just want to note, please feel free to use either the chat feature or the Q&A if you have questions throughout the presentation. We'll be sure to be monitoring the chat box and the Q&A and hopefully answer your questions to the best of our ability throughout the training. And if there's a question we can't answer, we'll be sure to work with Javante to follow up and answer that over email and share resources. All right. So what is SEO? What is search engine optimization? So search engine optimization is how websites attract unpaid traffic from free search engines or software systems that are designed to carry out web search. The big one, as you all, I'm sure, are well aware, is Google. So much so that Google is now a verb, essentially. And then there are other search engines that are pretty popular, like Bing or Yahoo, just to name a couple examples. And ultimately, search engines want to get consumers exactly what they're looking for. They are designed so that when you enter in a search term, they are programmed and they have algorithms in place to try to pull for you the resources, the information, the links to websites that are hopefully going to be most relevant to your search terms and give you the answers to your questions. So why is SEO important? So optimizing websites and web pages for SEO allows search engines to present the most relevant results. So websites and web pages are ranked by what search engines think will be most useful to users. And they do this by a variety of factors, many of which we'll get to later in this presentation. For example, how easy is the site to navigate? How easy is the content to understand? Is it optimized for mobile use? Can you use and access information on a website on a mobile phone? Rank determines where a website will appear in the search results. So that's when you get into thinking about things like which page is your website showing up on. So if somebody searches macular degeneration, for example, and you're the National Eye Institute, is your website showing up at the top of the search results on the first page, or do users have to click through a few pages of search results to get to your web page and web content? So why is it important is if you want to get more visibility and more traffic on your website, you want to make sure you're optimizing for these many factors that we'll get into to boost your SEO and increase your position, your search position in search engine results. And just a little background on the technical side of just a little background on the technical side of how search engines find your content. So search engines work by crawling billions of pages across websites using website crawlers. And you may have heard of these website crawlers referred to as spiders or bots. And these crawlers navigate the World Wide Web and follow links to find new pages. And then these pages are indexed. So they're added to an index that search engines regularly pull results from. And then that all culminates to ranking. So this kind of last phase is that search engines are continually ranking web content based on factors like accessibility, page speed load time, keywords, things like that, many of which we'll cover in today's presentation. And I do want to share a bit about what we do and don't know about Google ranking factors. I'm using Google here since that is the most common search engine, and do want to note that other search engines have slightly different algorithms. But for the purpose of today's presentation, we'll focus on Google. So here's what we do know. Google uses over 200 ranking factors in its algorithm, and these factors are continuously changing. So for example, one thing we'll talk about is metadata, and using keywords in your metadata. And there's been a lot of debate about that. Previously, research showed that there was a higher correlation with using keywords and metadata to boost your website's SEO. And while that still has a positive impact on your website's SEO, more recently, data has shown that there's less of a correlation. So it's something we'll dig into a little more. It's still really important to think about keywords in the context of your metadata, but the relevancy and the impact of how it's connected to your search position is constantly changing. So that can make it really hard for us to know, what do we prioritize? So as we go through, some of the factors we'll talk about are proven. So things like content quality, mobile usability, those are factors that directly impact your website search position. And then there are some factors that are a little more controversial. For example, domain age or code quality. So I think that, something interesting that we talk about at Communicate Health is domain age. So domain age, just to give an example, is, how old is your domain? We've seen, based on many studies, that domains that are older and have more quote unquote authority are connected to higher search ranking. However, experts in Google's algorithm have said that technically that is not a direct SEO factor. So there's some tips that we'll talk about that may be a little more controversial, but we'll be sure to call that out for you all. So I think, to summarize, just to really underscore and hopefully try to demystify these SEO ranking factors, there truly isn't a magic trick to make sure that your site ranks first in Google search results. But by following the best practices that we're going to walk through today, you can make it easier for search engines to crawl, index, and understand your web content. And in terms of how we talk about the factors that impact SEO, we'll start by covering content factors. So these are things like content quality, headers, links, keywords, meta descriptions. Then we'll get into more of the technical side of things. So page speed load times like performance, sitemap, looking at internal search. And lastly, we'll cover outreach and partnership elements, like building an external linking strategy. Prioritizing SEO for your website. Passing to you, Kelsey.
Great, thank you. So in short, one of the big points that we want to leave you all with today is this idea that SEO can and should be underlying all of your web activities. When you're first starting a web project in that discovery phase, thinking about keywords that make sense for your audiences. And then when you're actively creating new content like blog posts and articles. And then in the future, when you're thinking about adding new features, new content types, or rebranding your brand. So really it should be underlying every step of that process for you. And next, I'll let Sammy share some content considerations to keep in mind.
Thanks, Kelsey. Any questions that folks have so far? Please feel free to use the chat box. I'll just give it a minute. All right. So content considerations. So there are many factors. There are many content factors that go into determining a website's search rank. So information architecture is one of them. And this one's a little more nuanced. So information architecture is essentially the organization of the content on your website. And data shows us from analytics and studies that different entities have done that good website navigation makes it easier for your visitors to find what they're looking for, and it makes it easier for search engines to crawl your website. And the result is that this means more conversions and greater search visibility. So to speak to how this actually translates to impacting SEO. So when we talk about conversions, we're talking about users taking a desired action on your page or site. So for example, maybe you have web content and the call to action or the action that you want your user to take is to sign up for a newsletter to learn more. Maybe you want them to come to your website, read about your content and download a resource or a toolkit. Or maybe you want them to make an appointment. Those are just some examples of different actions a user could take coming to a site. So by having users actually stay on your website and take that action, that signals to search engines that users are having a positive user experience on your site, and that sends signals to positively impact your SEO. Content quality. This is a big one, and this is one we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in today's training. And I will note that some of this connects to the Writing for Health Literacy training that some of our colleagues, Melanie and I believe David did a few months ago, if you attended that webinar. So this is one of the most important things that you can do for your website's SEO. Developing engaging, shareable, and actionable content for your audiences means that it's more likely that they're going to spend time on your website and complete the tasks that you want them to. So this explanation sort of connects to what I was saying a little earlier with information architecture, that you are doing these different actions is creating a more positive user experience for your audiences, meaning that they're going to spend more time on your website. They're going to engage with your content, clicking through to other pages on your site or signing up for a newsletter, for example. And it's signaling to search engines that users are having a positive experience. They are finding what they're looking for. They're positively engaging with your content, and that directly impacts your SEO. So it's content quality. As you can see on here, there's a lot that's wrapped up in content quality. Plain language is a big one. Is your content easy to read and understand? Does your content answer users' question and meet their information needs? If you have done any sort of surveys or formative research with your audiences and you know what they're looking for on your site, are you making sure that your content is written in such a way that it's easy for users to find that info? And are you leveraging what you know about the keywords and key phrases that your audiences are looking for? And in a little bit, we'll actually talk about how you can pull and find out what keywords your audiences are using to get to your website. And a little bit about plain language. Plain language is information your audience can understand the first time they read or hear it. So what can you do for plain language on your website? First is choosing simple, familiar words. So using terms that people hear in everyday conversation. And sometimes at Communicate Health, we like to call this living room language. And if a simpler term exists than the term you're going with, almost always go with a simpler term instead, since that matches what your users are expecting. So we'll do a quick activity. So in this segment, we're going to replace some of these jargony terms, with their plain language equivalent. So please use the chat feature. I'll click and a word will pop up, and I encourage you to include the plain language counterpart in the chat. And I do want to note that sometimes you'll need to use a few words. So it's okay if you need to chat a phrase versus just one word. So the first one is monitor. Yep, I see watch, screen, keep track of. Yep, those are all spot on. All right, next one is recur. Repeat. Happen again. Repeat. Yep, those are all great. And for some of these, there isn't just one answer. So these are all great. Ingest. Eat, take in, read, understand. Yeah, these are all great. We have swallow here, but take in, eat, those are all good ones too. And read and understand, that's actually a great point. I hadn't even thought of that in terms of ingesting information versus ingesting, a food or chemical. So those are great examples. And lastly, infection. Sickness, illness, disease. Yeah, these are all great. And for this one, we included a slightly longer plain language equivalent, but a type of sickness that can spread to others. Thank you for participating. That was great. And I think, one thing we like to underscore here too is that at Communicate Health, we have done user research with thousands of individuals, people with limited health literacy, and people of different education levels, but also with public health professionals. And as public health professionals, you all know that you're really busy. So including content, including information in plain language, even for busy professionals, can really go a long way. And I think the other important distinction here too is, especially when we're communicating about health information, we know that health information is sensitive. So thinking about the state in which people are receiving health information, they might be scared, nervous, frustrated. So those are all different emotional factors that impact people's ability to process information, and is another reason to err on the side of using plain language whenever possible. And as we touched on with that, that infection example, it's important to define jargon and technical terms. So there are times where you may actually need to use a complicated term. And if you do, that's okay. It just means that you should always define it when possible. And these are just some examples of, times where you may need to use a more complicated term like hyperglycemia. So you can see here there are opportunities to define it. All right. Another tip related to plain language that also relates to broader content quality, which impacts SEO, is writing in active voice. So it's truly all connected to content quality. And this best practice helps people with more limited health literacy to understand content. So what is active voice? Active voice is when the subject of the sentence is doing the action rather than receiving the action. And we'll look at some examples here. So this is an example of passive voice. Headaches may be experienced after treatment. And I know it can be tempting to write in this passive voice, especially when there isn't a specific person you're talking to. But here's some examples of how you can take passive voice and change it to active voice to make it more actionable for your audiences. You may have headaches after your treatment. And this helps signal to people reading this content that this information is for them and is clear, more actionable. So now we're going to get into keywords. Keywords is something that comes up a lot when we talk about search engine optimization, because keywords, these are often the terms that people are searching to get to your content, if they're getting to your content through organic search. So it's important to understand what users are searching for. If you use Google, you can reference your Google Search Console results, and that allows you to, through Google Analytics, through Google Search Console results, that allows you to pull what are the top search terms that people are using to get to your website. So for example, I'll just share an example of a project or an organization that Kelsey and I work with. We work with the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. And one of the websites we work on is health.gov. So a lot of the search terms are things like hypertension or mental health or Healthy People 2030, which is one of the initiatives that the Office of Disease Prevention Health Promotion oversees. So understanding those keywords helps our team to develop content that meets their needs and can also help inform new content that we develop. If we know that a lot of people are searching mental health, that's an opportunity to prioritizing developing blog posts about mental health or thinking about homepage real estate and promoting that content and resources on the homepage. And in a little bit, Kelsey will talk about opportunities to include these keywords in your page titles, domain name, metadata, headings, and your body copy or web content copy, which will be important and relevant for search engines that are crawling your site. I do want to note here that you want to also make sure to avoid oversaturating your web content with keywords, since search engines do penalize duplicative content. So it can be tempting if you know people are searching high blood pressure to just want to put that in all over the place on your website, but that can, if you're not careful, that can have a negative impact. All right, and we'll just do a little practice here. So this is just an example of thinking about keywords and thinking about some of the plain language tips that we've talked about. This is a made up example of a call out box that might be featured on a local health department's website. So if folks want to take a minute to think about this, I'd love if people could use the chat feature to rewrite this content using some of the plain language best practices we just covered. So I'll give folks a minute. All right, I see. Thank you, Emily. I see changing our department to we. That's a great point. That's a great suggestion. So helping your audience see themselves in the content. All right, so I'll show the after example. So here we've got, let's get Franklin County vaccinated. Oh, I see another comment, yearly. That's a good point. We didn't do that here, but yearly that is a great point. That's a more succinct way of saying that. So here we have, let's get Franklin County vaccinated. So if you are talking about vaccines, likely that is a keyword or search term that people are using to get to your content. So actually putting that in the header and being specific. So instead of learning about our promotion, making it more action oriented and specific. Let's get Franklin County vaccinated. And then having a more descriptive link title. So instead of learn more here, learn where you can find local vaccine drives near you. All right, well, I'm going to pass it over to Kelsey to talk about actionable headers.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Sammy. So when we talk about choosing actionable headers, it feeds into this idea about plain language where we want to give users what they're looking for up front. So by breaking our content into chunks, it allows users to skim content, look for those bolded words that they're really searching for, clearly find them, and then being able to quickly understand what the following content underneath it is about. If you could go to the next slide, Sammy. Oh, or we could do this activity. So a quick tip that CH uses in our own work, we like to use headers that start with action words or maybe a question. So how can I get vaccinated? Or instead of about asthma, we could write prevent asthma attacks. So things that users can do to actively change behaviors or address a need that they have.
And I'll just note too that often to build on Kelsey's point, thinking about the action-oriented or question-oriented title is often how users are searching for this information on search engines. And this aligns with a lot of research that Communicate Health has done with audiences on this topic.
Thanks, Amy. So up next, we have this idea of metadata. And metadata is the HTML code that communicates to search engines about what that web page content is and what it's trying to convey. This metadata can include topic tags, title tags, descriptions, and various other data throughout that code on the back end. So this is information that's generally input by your content editors or managers who work on putting your developed content directly onto the web. And this metadata is generally never seen by your site's users. So I will be going through these three main metadata considerations you should keep in mind, including using meaningful titles, using semantic headings, and giving images and other files meaningful names. So here we have an example of how a content management system or a CMS may give you options to input metadata. CH uses Drupal for a majority of our projects as our CMS. So this screenshot here is what it looks like for us when we go to input metadata onto the pages that we work on. This is also a great place to add in keywords, which we just talked about. So you can see examples like this if you ever upload videos to YouTube, for example. They give you the option to add in keyword tags, which just helps users find your content more easily when they're searching.
And I'll also note that it has a dual benefit of boosting your SEO, but also is more accessible. So more accessible to screen readers for people who may be visually impaired.
Yes, exactly. So up next, we have the idea of semantic headers. And this is just a jargony way to say that you should be using clear hierarchies in your content with your headers flowing in descending order of importance. So on the right here, we have an example of how you could, or you should be laying out your content. So the title is your header 1 or H1, and then that can be followed by a subtopic header, H2, and then your topic header can also have a related subtopic header, which would be an H3. Just that cascading delineation of importance is really important for both your users to understand the importance of the content that they're reading, but also for search engines to be able to effectively understand the organization of your page. So here we have another easy thing that you can do to optimize your content, which is to give images and files meaningful names. So below we've used this example of the CH logo. So on the left, we have a logo file that's just named image_01. I'm sure we all have had many examples of this in our own work where we kind of run out of steam when we're naming our files. I know I certainly do. But a better way to name this is shown on the right, communicate health_logo. And this gives search engines more confidence when they're looking at your content to see that it's legitimate and these images are actually meaningful for your users. So another related feature of metadata is this use of alt text, which Sammy touched on a minute ago. So alt text is used to describe images on web pages or in documents. So here we have an example of a person in a wheelchair dribbling a basketball in front of a basketball hoop. And this is what would be read to someone using assistive technology if they can't visually see the image on the screen. So using alt text is an integral part about providing an accessible user experience. For example, it's crucial for people using assistive technology or people whose browsers maybe are unable to load a full image just due to their bandwidth or any other issues they may be having. And even beyond creating an accessible experience for all of our users, using alt text is actually really important for your SEO and is considered a major ranking factor for search engines. So when writing alt text, there are a few best practices to keep in mind. Be concise and avoid redundant information. Describe the action or relevance of the image. Use demographic information like race, ethnicity, gender, and age carefully and intentionally. And finally, use punctuation. Screen readers are programmed to take punctuation into account, and punctuation also makes your alt text easier to read, regardless of why someone may encounter it.
And an important note about punctuation. So often Communicate Health, when we're working on websites, we will, one of the quality control measures that we do before publishing a new page is having a screen reader read through the alt text for images and the alt text on a page. And it's really easy to tell if you've forgotten punctuation when you're listening to a screen reader, because it will just blend through the sentences without any sort of inflection. So that punctuation is really key to ensuring that somebody who's using assistive technology can understand the information and content that's being conveyed.
Thanks, Amy. So one other major important factor to keep in mind when you're developing alt text is context. So where is this image being used and what do we actually want it to mean when someone is looking at it? So here we're going to do a little activity and we're going to look at this image on the right-hand side and consider it how we would write the alt text for it if it were placed in the context listed in items 1, 2, and 3 on the left. So how would you write the alt text for this if it were in an article titled Older Adults, 5 Tips for Staying Active? If it were next to a link for cycling workout videos in a photo grid of activities, or if it was on the homepage of a dental practice. So if you want to throw some ideas into the chat, that would be great. I see Lynn posted for number 1, senior adult male rides a bicycle. That's great. That captures the context, and it also aligns with this idea of older adults. So that's a great example. Thank you. And then Miles, I see you added an older Black man is smiling while cycling. That's another great example. I like that you noted that he's smiling. I think that really adds to the visual idea that this alt text is giving. Okay, so for cycling is great exercise, pedaling for pleasure, cycling workout tips. That's an interesting one. I like that you added pedaling for pleasure. That's definitely speaking to wanting to motivate people to get active. These are all really great examples. Thanks, everybody. So I'll just quickly share some examples that I came up with. So for number 1, I wrote older adult riding a bicycle and smiling broadly. And then for number 2, I wrote cycling workout video. The screen reader would automatically point out that this is an image in a link container, so there's no need to repeat that. And then lastly, if this is an illustration on a homepage for a dental practice, the image can actually be considered decorative. And in that case, it doesn't actually add any additional information and therefore doesn't need alt text, which I think is really interesting to keep in mind when you're adding artwork or illustration to any web pages. And I just want to reiterate that there are no hard set rules when it comes to the level of detail you want to provide or focus on when you're describing an image. So alt text can be somewhat subjective. But if you use plain language and keep that in mind, you're well on your way to creating great alt text. So a few takeaways just to keep in mind moving forward. You want to describe exactly what you want the user to understand about the images you're using. You want to consider the context in which the users are seeing the images, and you want to remember that alt text is subjective, and that's okay. Sammy, could you go to the next slide? Thanks. So one last thing on alt text, now that we've talked about why it's important and how to write it, here are some examples of how you actually add that alt text when you're creating your web content. So if you're writing HTML, which is the code behind your website, alt text is part of what's called the image tag. And there are many attributes in the image tag, so this is just one of many, but that's where it lives. If you have a content management system like Drupal that we use at CH, but also WordPress or Squarespace, any of those CMSs, there should be dedicated fields for alt text connected to each image. So each CMS is slightly different, but that's usually where you'd enter the alt text, which you can see on the right-hand side here is an example. Lastly, I do want to mention that it's often overlooked on social media, but alt text is really important in that context as well. And each platform handles entering alt text slightly differently, but it shouldn't be too hard to find. So the 4 S's to improve links. So I have some quick tips for optimizing your URLs. You want to be specific so users know where exactly the link is leading them to. You want to be sincere so that you meet your users' expectations. You want to use substantial link labels so they make sense even if they're out of context. And you want to keep them succinct and keep them as short as possible while still being specific, sincere, and substantial. And on the right-hand side here, we have an example of some linked text that we use on Healthy People 2030 that we think fulfills those 4 S's. Thanks, Amy. So some final context considerations for you are conduct regular updates to your content beyond just fixing a typo here and there. Search engines can actually tell if you've just fixed a typo or you've added some like fluff material. They want to see substantial updates like new blog posts, new web pages, to show that you're actively engaged with your site so that your users can be too. We want to avoid duplicative content, so don't reuse content across multiple pages, and don't copy existing content from peer or competitor pages either. And you want to use distinct URLs for pages in different languages. So for example, the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, ODPHP, they have a tool called My Health Finder that has a unique set of URLs for all of their Spanish content that is separate from their English language content. And we have an example here below where you can see that they have their distinct URLs. So with that, I think I will turn it back to Sammy to talk about any technical considerations. And please feel free to drop any questions that you have about this portion in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on it.
Thanks, Kelsey. So some technical considerations to boost your website's SEO. So the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones to consider, is page performance, also referred to as page load time or page load speed. And we know that this is a direct ranking factor for Google search algorithm, as well as other search algorithms, or I'm sorry, other search engines. So how do you evaluate or assess your page performance for your website? So there are lots of tools out there. You could use tools like Google Chrome Developer or PageSpeed Insights, for example. There's also tools like Lighthouse. And by leveraging these tools, here's an example here. They will give you scores at certain points in time. We do recommend that you take these scores on a regular basis, since there are many factors that can impact your score at a certain point in time. And these reports will also identify recommended improvements for how you can improve the performance of a given page. And just to connect this back to how this relates to SEO is poor performance or long load times for pages sends a negative signal to search engines. So that's a direct way in which it impacts SEO. The other piece to consider is it indirectly negatively impacts SEO, because often pages that have longer load times or pages that have poorer performance often have higher bounce rates, meaning we've all had the experience where you're searching for something, you click on a website and you wait 5 seconds and it still hasn't loaded yet. And often users who are busy decide to leave the site and try something else if it's not loading. And that can also, in that way, indirectly impact your SEO. The other major factor in terms of technical considerations that directly impacts SEO is designing for small screens, or designing mobile-friendly sites. And mobile-friendly design, which you may have heard called in the industry, sometimes people call it responsive design. This is crucial to designing digital products for health literacy. And we know based on content that Google has published about their ranking factors that mobile friendliness of a website is a confirmed Google ranking factor. If a website displays less information on mobile than on desktop, Google doesn't have as much context to use for rankings. So just to show an example of that, you can see the New York Times does a really nice job designing for mobile. So this is what it looks like on desktop, and then on your mobile phone, it nicely wraps. The images wrap really nicely, so you can still read all of the content on your phone without missing anything, versus this is just an example website where you can see all of the content in full screen, but when you look on your mobile screen, you would likely need to scroll and move the screen around in order to read the full content. So this, we know, negatively impacts SEO when this happens. And I think to give a little, that's how it technically impacts SEO. And to give a little background on optimizing for mobile, some things to keep in mind are people with limited literacy are often more likely to be accessing the internet on their phones. And actually, many people, regardless of their health literacy levels, are accessing content, web content on their phones. Especially people looking, whether it's for health content, other content, and in a mobile context, it's important to consider internet speed. So we talked on the previous slide about page load time. And if your website isn't optimized for mobile, it could impact page load time, which also impacts SEO. Another tip is to add a friendly 404 page to your website if you don't already have one. This is also known as page not found content type. These errors come up if a selected URL does not exist or is unpublished or is made private. So this is nice because it gives users a clear reason of why they're being directed to an error page and gives options for linking them back to the content that you want them to see. So while it's not ideal that somebody stumbles upon this type of an error, overall, we have found in our research that 404 pages improve overall user experience. Next, a bit about XML sitemaps. So sitemaps are mapped lists of all the pages on your website. And what you can do for your website is save them as quote unquote XML code that search engines can read. And that sounds a little more complicated than it really is. You can see here, you can imagine a website with different hierarchy, several pages, and pulling an XML sitemap is essentially just a list, a flat list of those links. And here's an example. You can see a list of these different links with the last date modified. And search engines can use this information to crawl your site and interpret the content. So I do want to note here, while you don't need a link, you don't necessarily need a link of the site of a sitemap on your website. We found that search engines don't technically need one to crawl your site, but it certainly does help. So you can pull an XML sitemap of your website and submit it directly through Google Search Console, and that can dramatically improve your site's indexing. All right, I know we are running a little over on, we're almost at time. So just a couple other technical considerations. So these have less of an impact on your your SEO. However, we do recommend migrating and retiring microsites. It's not that microsites are inherently bad for SEO, but often if your website has many different microsites or even a few different microsites, there's a higher probability that you're repeating content across these microsites, and duplicative content negatively impacts SEO. So that's a consideration there. And then enabling crawl accessibility on your website so search engines can reach and index your content and then hopefully rank it positively. All right, passing to Kelsey to go through some last partnership and outreach considerations.
Great. Thank you, Sammy. Yes, leveraging partnerships and outreach can really positively impact your SEO. To start, conducting user research helps you better understand your audience's needs and interests, which ultimately will help you craft content that better serves your users and that search engines will be able to pick up on. And that can also inform your use of keywords and that interest mapping that we've talked about. If you go to the next one. Awesome, thank you. So backlinking is another ranking factor that search engines look at. So this is when external sites link back to your site, like we see in the below example. So here, the Pennsylvania Department of Health is linking from their site to the Healthy People 2030 site, and that would be considered a backlink for the Healthy People 2030's SEO. So basically, backlinks affect how search engines assess the veracity of your content by showing that other sites think that your site is valuable to users. Backlinks can also impact your domain authority, which is, it's just a predictive measure of how likely your site is to appear in search engine results compared to your peers or competitors. And that is measured based on a bunch of factors through different algorithms, but basically it takes information from backlinks, referring traffic, and overall search traffic. And while domain authority is not a Google SEO ranking factor, it can be used in conjunction with other SEO data to better understand how your content is performing. Thanks, Sammy. So developing an external linking strategy is really reliant on what we've just talked about. So building relationships with your peers in your field to help encourage them to add backlinks to their sites for you. So you can do this by, reaching out and building those relationships with your company and through your network and your coworkers and colleagues, but also by regularly publishing and promoting content in your niche, like articles and blogs. And this just adds to this reputation building that's really important. And so social media activity doesn't directly impact your SEO, but promoting content that boosts referral traffic to your site can positively impact your SEO. And those pages that you're driving traffic to will more readily come up in search results. And improve your overall rankings. So I think from here, Sammy's going to take over and talk about measuring success.
Thanks, Kelsey. So to close us out, we want to think about, how do we know if we're successful? How do we know if what we're doing on our site is impacting our website's SEO? So there's a couple things you can do. You can track pre and post updates. So for example, if you are improving your site navigation and making changes to the information architecture, or you're doing an audit of content and you're going to do a plain language audit and update your page headers and content to infuse those keywords, make those headers actionable. What you can do is you can, there's a couple things you can do. One is you can use analytics. So you can use analytics to see if there's any changes in traffic. You can also do user testing. User testing won't tell you if your search position has changed, but user testing will tell you whether or not your content is more understandable and actionable. And I know we've been talking about Google Analytics. There are other analytics software and packages that you can use. For example, Adobe Analytics is a popular one as well. And lastly is reviewing trends over time. So this stuff doesn't happen overnight. So it's helpful to think about what are your goals? How much do you want to, how much is realistic for you to improve your SEO? And then look at where you are, set goals for where you want to be, and start chipping away at implementing those best practices to see those trends over time and how it positively impacts your website. And I do want to just, I will plant a seed for folks that we're going to be doing an analytics training in a few months as well, where we'll get more into the weeds on how to set an evaluation strategy and how to set KPIs and monitor trends over time for things like SEO, as well as many other analytics elements. So a quick recap, if nothing else, make sure you're developing engaging, shareable, and actionable content. A reminder to don't skip the metadata, optimize for mobile usability, prioritize improvements to website accessibility and performance. Make sure to develop an external linking strategy that can go a long way. Always conduct audience user research when you can. Create a social media strategy and use web analytics to monitor and evaluate trends over time.